Oswald Mosley was a British aristocrat born to a wealthy landowning family in London on the 16th of November in 1896. He had a career in the Labour Party, then having become disillusioned with mainstream politics, he founded the British Union of Fascists in 1932. The BUF never won a single seat in Parliament and never came close to the levels of popular support that brought Mussolini to power. Fascism is fundamentally alien to British traditions. The British political system was stable and resistant to authoritarian takeovers. You'll never see a march on London. After the outbreak of the Second World War in 1940, Mosley was imprisoned and the British Fascist Party was banned. His political career ended here. But what if Mosley had remained in the Labour Party? Mosley, at the beginning of his career, was considered a rising star and possible future prime minister by many. He was an energetic young man, brilliant and a charismatic speaker. He fought in the First World War in France and, in 1918, when he was only 21 years old, was elected into the British Parliament, becoming one of the youngest members of Parliament ever elected. In the 1924 general election, Mosley stood in Birmingham Ladywood against the future Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, losing for only 77 votes after 3 recounts. Now, let's suppose that Mosley defeats Chamberlain. After the victory, Mosley rapidly gains popularity among the British public and inside the Labour Party, becoming one of the main leaders. He was rich, he could afford to spend part of his private fortune on his political career. In 1929, he serves in the national government formed by Ramsay MacDonald as Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent to that of a finance minister in other countries. Mosley remains in the national government of MacDonald until 1935, becoming Lord Chancellor, one of the highest-ranking ministers. Meanwhile in Europe, Adolf Hitler is the Chancellor of Germany. Mussolini and the Fascist Party are in power in Italy. Stalin is the General Secretary of the Soviet Union. Roosevelt in the USA has started the New Deal. The British Empire is the first world power, and the Royal Navy is the largest fleet on Earth. In China, the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek and the communist forces of Mao Zedong are engaged in a civil war, while the skirmishes with the Japanese continue. India is part of the British Empire. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland and South Africa are British dominions, former colonies with strong ties to London but almost independent. Most of Africa and Asia are part of the European colonial empires. The effects of the Great Depression are still present in the entire world. 20th of January 1936. The king of the British Empire, George V, dies. The new king is Edward VIII. Edward, although not a true fascist himself, is quite sympathetic to Nazi ideologies, admiring Hitler and viewing fascism as an effective countermeasure against communism. Indeed, at the time, many European and American politicians were impressed by the economic achievements of the fascist regimes. King Edward, however, had a problem. He wants to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had divorced her first husband and was seeking a divorce from her second. Baldwin, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, opposes the marriage, since a foreign divorced woman with 2 living ex-husbands is unacceptable as a queen. Edward knew that if he married against the advice of his ministers, he would cause a constitutional crisis, but he is not willing to abandon his love. This brings Sir Oswald Mosley into the focus of King Edward. Mosley is not against his marriage. He's popular, one of the most important politicians in the Labour Party, young but already an expert. He is strongly anti-communist and willing to avoid any future war with Germany as the new king. He will be a good choice as a prime minister. On the 10th of March 1936, Edward declares that he has chosen to marry the woman he loves, Wallis Simpson, and that he will not abdicate. Baldwin resigns, deeming this solution unsuitable for the British throne. After a few days, King Edward appoints Mosley as prime minister. Now, Great Britain has a king with pro-Nazi sympathies, and a prime minister, Mosley, not openly fascist but quite keen towards fascist ideas. On the international stage, the world is split between concern and jubilation. Adolf Hitler and Mussolini sent letters of congratulations to the British government, calling for further diplomatic ties between the nations. The Soviet Union and France expressed feelings of uneasiness. In the United States, someone sees Mosley's rise to power as an almost betrayal on the part of America's historical ally, even if there is a desire to continue having good relationship with London. Mosley gets to work straight away. Mosley was an early supporter of the economist Keynes. He puts forward the scheme of his Mosley Memorandum, partly inspired by Italian fascism. State nationalization of some of the main industries, a public works program to solve poverty and unemployment, reform of the Bank of England, high tariffs to protect British industries. He is against globalization. He thinks that buying cheaper goods from other nations may seem appealing, but ultimately causes the death of the domestic industry and leads to large unemployment. Does it remind you of anything? An important part of Mosley's actions will concern relations with Germany. There will be a visit in Germany to meet Hitler. In a summit at the Berghof at Berchtesgaden, they signed a declaration of Anglo-German friendship, which contained a statement that our two peoples never go to war again. There is the signing of a trade agreement to increase economic cooperation. In the next months, there will be the ratification of the Anglo-German Naval Agreement that allows Germany to build submarines and aircraft carriers, but limits the size of the Kriegsmarine. It's not a problem for Germany that it's a continental power without colonial possession, that it neither needs them nor could they afford the building of a huge navy to challenge Britain, the leading world navy since 1600. He travels to Rome for direct talks with Mussolini to normalize relationships between Italy and the United Kingdom. Mosley returns to London almost in triumph because the possibility of a new war has receded. Indeed, the relations with Germany were relatively good until 1939, even without Mosley. Britain and Germany did not have very different interests. Germany does not care about what happens in the British Empire, while Eastern Europe is not the main focus of London. Britain was always Hitler's first ally of choice, willing to restore the old British-German alliance. Hitler fought against the British in World War I and admires them, let alone the fact that the Britons and Saxons are brothers of the Germans. Mosley could decide to side with Germany not only because he likes it, but above all because it suits him. Mosley, as Chamberlain in our timeline, is aware better than Churchill that a fight against Germany that had spent 7 years mobilizing for war could lead to bankruptcy and the end of the empire even in case of victory. For sure, the traditional British policy always was to support the weaker side of Europe to maintain the balance of power, but this policy worked when Europe was the only important continent. Now new powers are arising all around the world, so it's better to have the strongest partner possible. The friendship between Germany and Britain is perfect in some way. Germany is a land power with the strongest land army on Earth. Britain dominates the oceans with the strongest navy on Earth. Soon after, King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson are married. After the ceremony, the couple waves to a gigantic and cheering crowd from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. In 1936, Mosley too got married, with the beautiful Diana Mitford. Joseph Goebbels is invited at the marriage. Diana is also a fascist. All of the Mitford family is fascinating, especially the sisters. Pamela, a bohemian and probably bisexual. Unity Valkyrie, fanatically devoted to Nazism. She belonged to Hitler's inner circle of friends. In our timeline, when the United Kingdom and Germany went to war, she attempted suicide by shooting herself in the head. Diana, Mosley's bride. Nancy, a novelist. Jessica Lucy is the black sheep of the family. Unlike the rest of her family, she was a communist. She was in Spain to participate in the Civil War, then moved to the United States, where she was a member of the American Communist Party. Out of this photo is Deborah, a duchess married with Andrew Cavendish, Duke of Devonshire, an eccentric British politician. The British government of Mosley pursues a more vigorous version of the British appeasement policy of the 1930s. On the 7th of March 1936, the Wehrmacht enters the Rhineland, contravening the Treaty of Versailles, which established that it had to be demilitarized. London does not act like in our timeline, however. In our reality, MacDonald, a former prime minister, even declared that he was pleased that the Treaty of Versailles was vanishing, expressing his hope that the French had been taught a severe lesson. France, unwilling to risk the war alone, chose not to enforce the treaty as well. Relations between Germany and the Soviet Union are increasingly tense. There will be no Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. With the English at their side, the Germans don't need anything else, and such a pact might not be well received by the British. The Soviets ask Finland to cede some border territories in exchange for land elsewhere, claiming the protection of Leningrad, only 32 kilometers from the Finnish border. Finland refuses. Similar requests are made to Romania for Bessarabia and to the Baltic states to conclude mutual assistance treaties. They refuse too. Without the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that included those countries into the Soviet sphere, the Soviets will not attempt any military action. The Spanish Civil War ends like in our timeline with the victory of Francisco Franco. March 1938. The Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Germany, will go smoother. August 1938. The Sudetenland, an area of western Czechoslovakia, home to a large ethnic German minority, is annexed into Germany. There won't be a need for the Munich Conference. In the following months, Germany will take all of Bohemia, ignored by the rest of the world. March of 1939. The German ultimatum is issued to Lithuania to return the Memel territory stolen from Germany by the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. Danzig. Germany is threatening war with Poland if the Poles do not permit the free city of Danzig to rejoin Germany. Prime Minister Mosley will not give Poland a promise of unconditional support. Mosley declares that Britain will not get involved in another European war over issues that we really don't care about. France will not give Poland a promise of unconditional support without the UK. Poland is not crazy enough to face Germany alone. Poland agrees to the peaceful return of Danzig to Germany. There will be the construction of an extraterritorial railway through the Polish corridor, connecting Berlin to Königsberg. In exchange, Poland obtains permanent rights to use the seaport of Danzig and economic concessions. Poland becomes the most favored nation in trade with Germany, few customs duties on exports, especially on coal, Poland's main export to Germany. In July of 1937, the Japanese restart the war with China. The relations between Japan and Britain have been bad since the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. The British think that the fall of China with the Japanese sphere of influence would mean the effective end of British colonies in Asia, as a Sino-Japanese combination would be a colossus that would dominate Asia. Germany has close relations with China, that is the biggest trade partner for German business in Asia, purchasing a great number of arms and receiving training by a German military mission led by Alexander von Falkenhausen. Germany has friendly relations with Japan as well, but too much rapprochement with Japan could damage relations with the United Kingdom. The Axis Pact will remain a pact between Rome and Berlin only. Japan will sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviets. They will concentrate their efforts on the war in China, and they will not sign the Anti-Comintern Pact. The Anti-Comintern Pact is an anti-communist pact, effectively an alliance against the Soviet Union. Germany and Italy signed it in 1937, followed by Hungary, Spain, Finland, Romania, Slovakia, and Yugoslavia. Mosley will sign the Anti-Comintern Pact too. A great worry to the British was the spectre of communism threatening British interests in Persia and India. Portugal and Greece, traditional British allies, will also adhere. In the following months, the Polish Foreign Minister Józef Beck will sign the Anti-Comintern Pact. The Anti-Comintern Pact will be the new Axis Pact, slowly becoming a military alliance. The political situation in France is unstable. The right parties like Action Française gain importance. The Prime Minister Pierre Laval is a fascist sympathizer. France for sure will not join the Hitler Fun Club, but will attempt to maintain good diplomatic relations with Britain and Germany, leaving them alone as much as possible. However, Hitler was never interested in a war with France. His eyes were looking in another direction. The Soviet Union grows increasingly uneasy, as Stalin now believes that with Britain under a pro-German government and Poland aligned with Germany, a war with Germany is likely. Germany had begun general conscription and had already amassed an army of 1 million troops near the Soviet border regions. With such a formidable, ideologically opposed bloc against him, Stalin would be more cautious with the purges. The killing of the competent top ranks of the Red Army will be much more reduced. There are frequent incidents at the border with Poland, with violations of the borders by both sides. The Poles discriminate the Russian minority in Poland, creating further disagreements with Moscow. Stalin orders plans to be accelerated to defend the western borders, deploying large units in Ukraine and Belarus. German intelligence soon learns of this. The buildup of Soviet troops at the borders convinces most of the military that the Soviets are about to attack. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa begins, presented as the preemptive strike to prevent the Soviet attack. Germany, Italy, Poland, Finland, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and Spain participate in the attack. Britain will join after a few days. The threat of a Soviet attack on Poland is sufficient enough to push Britain into war. British propaganda says that if the communists take control of the continent, Britain is next. The dominions of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Ireland have the right to declare war or not, independent of the UK. Historically, the interests of the British and the interests of the Dominions have not diverged significantly, so they sided with the UK in all of the major conflicts. They will enter the war in the next few weeks. The Soviet Union could always call up more soldiers than Germany, the UK, Italy, Finland, and Poland combined, and in this situation have the advantage that they know that the attack will arrive and are prepared. Indeed, in our timeline in 1940, the French were prepared as well, and that changed nothing. On the other side, there is no Lend-Lease, around 7% of the Soviet war effort. The US would not have gotten involved in backing the communist Soviet Union. Even if the USA would have been willing to ship war materials to the Soviets to wear down the new Axis, like US aid to Ukraine today, the Russian ports would also be blocked by the British, Italian, and German Navy forces that are also significantly more powerful than they were in our timeline, since they haven't spent the last years destroying each other. We will see the Bismarck and the Tirpitz fighting alongside the Royal Navy in the Arctic Sea. Ferry swordfish from Britain's sizable carrier fleet would strike ships at port facilities such as Murmansk, Vladivostok, and Arkhangelsk, combined with Axis submarines patrolling every port entrance and the Italian fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. The Soviet Navy would have been bottled up in ports. The Axis have greater industrial production because the British and the Germans haven't spent years bombing each other. No breaking of the Enigma Code. It was broken by the Polish, but Poland is now a German ally. The UK would not have provided information about the Japanese deciding not to attack Siberia, so Stalin might have kept the Siberian troops in the east. Britain will share its scientific and military technical secrets with the Germans, as in our timeline like they did with the USA. The invention of radar and submarine detection advances are only kept to the British and Germans. Jet and rocket technology, they were the top performers in those research areas as well. More importantly, there is no naval blockade on the Axis. The Wehrmacht has all the resources they need. Britain allows oil from the Middle East and Venezuela, and may even procure oil from the USA and sell it to Germany. In this situation, with no Western Front, the British, the strong Polish army, and the Italian army that did not lose half of their best soldiers in Africa, you could add to Operation Barbarossa more than 2 million men, 20,000 tanks, and 30,000 anti-aircraft and artillery guns. The British expeditionary forces sent to Russia could field around 150,000 soldiers and around 800 tanks, mainly light like the Mark VIC, the smaller machine gun armed A-11 Matilda, and the Bren carrier, quite useless on the Eastern Front, and a few Matilda IIs. Lord Gort is appointed commander of the BEF. The British could be deployed in the north, in the Finland and Leningrad front, part of the Army Group North, but still under British command. The RAF in Russia mainly have Hurricanes. The Legion of St. George's British Free Corps would be established for British men wishing to fight as SS auxiliaries. Indians, Canadians, Australians, Irish and New Zealand troops would fight in Russia, but there will be no colonial troops. Mosley had a distrust of colonial troops and makes every effort to reduce reliance on them, with the goal of slowly disbanding them. German panzers and infantry divisions smashed through Soviet defenses, capturing vast amounts of Soviet troops and territory in the first few weeks of the war. The Royal Air Force and the full-strength Luftwaffe, the Battle of Britain didn't happen, combined would make the most powerful air force on the planet by far. The Russians had no chance to inflict critical damage on the German industry, even less so on the British. However, neither can the Axis hit the Soviet industries in Siberia. The long-range British Avro Lancaster bombers were introduced only in 1942. Within months, the Axis is only a few dozen kilometers away from Moscow, after capturing Kiev and surrounding Leningrad. Now, I really admire the Russian people and their fighting capacity, but an Axis with oil, no naval blockade, no war in the West, no bombings, in my opinion would have defeated every country in the world. Moscow will fall in the spring of 1942 at the latest. However, Britain will probably put the reins on Germany and get the USSR to the peace table to cede lands to Germany, like it happened in World War I with the Brest-Litovsk Pact. Hitler could agree to a peace. He never wanted to conquer the world, neither all of Asia. He only wanted lands in the east, something like the colonies but in Europe. Finland gets part of Karelia. Romania gets parts of Ukraine but loses Transylvania to Hungary. Part of the lands occupied by the Polish after World War I are returned to Germany. As compensation, Poland is moved eastward, gaining territories from the Soviets like in our timeline when they moved west. Belarus, the Caucasus, and Ukraine are puppet states under German influence. The British and Italian oil companies could obtain concessions on the petrol of Baku. After the war, there will be a huge, gigantic victory parade in London. Britain remains the first world power. The war was shorter, not a single bomb fell on England, no Lend-Lease debts, only limited numbers of soldiers involved, fewer losses on the fleet. In Europe there is German hegemony all over the mainland. This outcome is not perfect for the British, but better than to become an American colony like in our timeline. There will be no Pearl Harbor, so the USA are not invited to the party. In this situation, the Royal Navy, since it does not need to protect the commercial shipping across the Atlantic, as well as maintaining a presence in the critical Mediterranean, have sufficient warships to dissuade Japan from attacking Singapore, Hong Kong, or other adventures. The Sino-Japanese War will end with a negotiated peace. Japan only has oil and resources to support a third of its army, and American Lend-Lease loans to China are increasing, strengthening China's military. They are also unable to defeat the Chinese Communist forces in Shanxi. Japan, however, obtains Mengjiang and several ports in southern China. Mosley was anti-Semitic, but there will be no anti-Semitic policies in Britain, just like there have been none in Japan. Without a harsh war, there is no Holocaust, or at least there is less death. Without the naval blockade, the Jews would also leave Europe, like it was before the war. However, it is difficult to find countries that would accept them. After German insistence, probably the British would allow the emigration of a greater number of Jews in the British Mandate of Palestine. The Havre Agreement will remain active after 1939. Palestine remains under British administration, and the riots between Arabs and Jews will be put down with far more violence. The US begins to increase its military size, which is in a sad state. There is a rapid expansion of shipbuilding and carrier construction, as well as the development of planes and tanks, including the B-29. The US continues to build their empire in Southern and Central America. Mosley would have done everything he could to secure India. The suppression of the independence movement and the mass disobedience events is more brutal. Figures like Netaji Bose are monitored and may be forced to expatriate in the USA. However, India will become independent soon, but the British, not weakened by a devastating war, are able to keep the other parts of the empire. All other European colonial empires will last longer as well. In the 1950s, Mosley advocates that Africa is to be divided into black and white areas, so in some colonies there would be a system similar to South African apartheid. The British, German, Italian Axis would have developed the nuclear bomb first. The USA did not invent the atomic weapons. The USA took British and Canadian research, tube alloys, and uranium to build their program. In Britain, immigration will be significantly curtailed. The 1948 Nationality Act, which gave people from the Commonwealth the right to live and work in Britain, will never exist. Reparation programs are enacted to return immigrants to their countries of origin or be settled in specific constructed ghettos. This is the New World. The British Empire is aligned with Europe and in competition with the United States. China would be in the American sphere of influence. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand would become much more loosely aligned with the Empire, becoming some of the main territories in which the two sides compete for influence. The US would work to undermine the British in their colonies and the Germans in the East. Europe and the Axis would be trying to draw China and South America away from the US. Both will try to bring Japan and India to their side. The USA and Russia could be allies having common enemies like Japan and the Axis. Sir Oswald Mosley was a supporter of a united Europe. We might see the birth of something like the European Union soon after the war. We hope that it's not the prison for nations dominated by an oligarchy that it is today, but a real union between people working together to improve the lands they love. So, this is the most likely outcome if Britain, with Mosley as Prime Minister, had joined the Axis. But do you want to play a game? This story could have another path. Germany and Britain could decide that Japan is a better ally than China. Japan signs the Axis Pact. The British signed it too. In the end, it's just a defensive pact. Then Japan invades China, while Germany, Italy, Britain, and the European allies attack Russia. Let's suppose that the USA is not so willing to sit down while Germany, Italy, Japan, and Britain divide the world between them. They begin to heavily support the Soviets with the Lend-Lease program, claiming that the British blockade is against the freedom of the seas. Incidents at sea are frequent. The American embargo on Japan becomes tougher. Then Japan attacks at Pearl Harbor with the tacit approval of the British. Hitler and Mussolini, already pissed off with the USA for the continuous skirmishes in the Atlantic, join Japan. At this point, the Britain of Mosley could decide that it's time to remove a competitor in the quest for world domination, with the USA being nothing more than a rebel colony. Now, the Second World War really begins.